Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to talk about Yellowjackets Season 3, Episode 9, titled How the Story Ends. We'll follow a similar format here of me talking about the two timelines separately, giving some pros and cons, and an overall episode rating at the end. Now on to the episode, this time starting off with the teenager storyline first. We open things up with the group still discussing whether or not to leave the wilderness, and we have Cody try to leave on his own, but then Shauna points a gun at him and forces him to stay. We then have Van go up to Ty, and they argue a little bit about Ty wanting to stay there in the wilderness. We then cut to a scene where Travis is making a trap that eventually captures the infamous Pit Girl, but at this point in time, we don't really know who that Pit Girl is still. We then cut to Shauna, who gathers most of our core group of girls here, and she's pretty concerned that there's going to be an uprising planned by some of the other girls amongst the group. We do then, in fact, see Natalie and Mari and Akila and a couple other girls here plotting to escape. I don't really get why they don't just take Shauna's gun while she's sleeping or something like that. Feels like that's a pretty easy opportunity to overthrow her. We then see Van wandering off in the forest, and she's trying to fix the radio that she found from the tent a couple episodes ago. And Misty is secretly following her here, so she knows about this. We then cut to Hanna and Melissa talking, and Hannah's telling Melissa about her daughter. Overall, they have a pretty friendly chat here, until we have Shauna come by and say, "Am I interrupting something?" Melissa then follows Shauna, and Shauna claims that Hannah's just trying to get some sympathy from her. Melissa then walks away from that conversation, and Shauna continues to berate her. She winds up pointing the gun at Melissa and actually shoots her jacket. We then cut to Travis and Lottie talking, and Travis says that Lottie's ruining this for them by not letting them leave. Lottie tells Travis that Javi is there amongst them and wants Travis to feel his presence. And then Lottie's walking towards that trap that Travis built, and I'm not really sure here if she either walked really close to it and didn't wind up walking over it, or if she in fact walked over it and had some kind of higher power protecting her. Not positive there. It wasn't really clear to me whether or not she was standing on top of the trap or not because it was covered with leaves either way. We then cut to Mari, who's taking Hanna out into the woods to let her go to the bathroom. And then we wind up running into Natalie, and she winds up giving Hanna a knife and says, "Let yourself and Cody free. We're all going to make a run for it tonight." We then cut to nighttime where we have Melissa approach that group who's trying to leave and says she wants to be a part of it. Hanna does wind up cutting herself loose, and Shauna somehow has this magic intuition that something's going on, so she rushes over there. She sees that they're trying to escape and pulls her gun out. She asks Hanna where she got the knife, and Hanna blames Cody. Cody calls her a liar, then she turns around and just stabs Cody straight in the eye and kills him. And then we have Hanna say that she wants to be part of their group, so feels like Hannah's lost her marbles a little bit, gone a little bit rogue here at this point in time. I guess this kind of validates why she didn't freak out when her husband died, because she's kind of gone crazy at this point. We then cut to part of that girl group who are trying to escape, and they're waiting for Hanna. They're not really sure why she hasn't shown up yet, until the other half of that group wind up showing up and telling them that Hanna killed Cody. And here we zoom in on Natalie's terrified face as she's realizing they're trapped as winter is approaching. Suddenly she sees a light in the distance, and we see it's Misty, who I think is at the black box she originally destroyed. And it looks like Misty's there to grab one of the parts from the transponder to use in the now broken radio. And then we close out the teenager side of things with Natalie freaking out a bit when she realizes that Misty's known about this transponder being here all along. Before jumping into the adult side of things, as a reminder, if you haven't yet, and if you enjoy talking about this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I would really appreciate it. So now pivoting over to the adult side of things. We open things up with Van imagining her younger self in the hospital room there with her. Young Van starts talking about the Goonies and how adult Van needs to get the treasure. Then we have adult Van wake up and see that Ty's in the room there with her. They talk for a little bit before Van gets up and says, "Let's go," and gives the line, "Goonies never say die." We cut back to Shauna and Melissa where we left things off in the prior episode with Shauna trying to feed Melissa her own body. Melissa winds up chewing it up and then spitting it at Shauna before she winds up running out to her car and taking off. Of course, she happens to be on low gas here, though. I'm kind of thinking, why realistically would that be the case? She would obviously plan on driving at some point. She just happened to leave her car with no gas in it. Feels pretty convenient here. We then cut to Ty, Van, and Misty driving to where Shauna's at. Suddenly, they see Melissa on the side of the road. Melissa starts taking off running, and then Ty gets out and tackles her. Van sees a railroad sign here with an X on it and points out X marks the spot, so it feels like she was meant to be here at this point in time. Melissa is held captive, and they wind up driving her back to her home. When they get there, Shauna's relieved and wants to tie her up. Another kind of weird situation here where Shauna's cleaning up the kitchen, but she winds up still having blood all over her face. I don't know if you want to say she's totally crazy, so logic's not really with her at this point. Misty winds up calling out Shauna, saying why was she in the city when Lottie died? Then Shauna replies with saying she was getting that cat for Jeff. Then Misty responds with saying, "Wow, what a totally satisfying answer," which was pretty funny to see. Shauna once again starts blaming Melissa for leaving the phone, the problem with her car brakes and being locked in the freezer. But then Misty finally admits here she was responsible for Shauna getting locked in the freezer. And then Misty winds up storming off saying this is Shauna's mess to clean up. We then cut to Jeff and Callie together, and Jeff points out that he landed the furniture deal with the Joels, and he's giving Callie some weed advice as well. We shift over to Misty, who's being dropped off by some Uber driver in the middle of a field, and we see Walter then land with a helicopter in that field. We have Shauna and Melissa do some bickering back and forth as far as who is crazier. Shauna having killed Adam in season 1, and Melissa having married Hanna's daughter. We then cut back to Jeff and Callie getting high together. This is probably the comedic scene for this episode. We have a Nirvana song playing and they're having a total blast. Jeff is super ripped and say, "Let's celebrate my new job and let's be ladies who lunch." And he lifts up his leg like he's showing off his calves. And then we get a bit of a tonal shift where Callie asks Jeff if he really thinks Shauna's crazy. He winds up denying it, but Callie says she does feel that way. And it seems odd they haven't checked in on Shauna. I'm also wondering at this point in time, are we kind of setting up Callie to maybe kill Shauna? And she's dropping little breadcrumbs for that to take place, saying things like Shauna's crazy here. Not sure, but maybe down the road that'll wind up happening. We cut to Misty and Walter together, and Misty points out that Shauna's story about going into the city for the Humane Society to get that cat is actually true. That's an alibi for her not having killed Lottie. Walter once again points out that Misty may be blinded by her relationship with the Yellowjackets. And then she asks to see the information from Lottie's phone and asks Walter for some chocolate shavings for her drink as well, ultimately wanting him to leave the room. And while away, she sees something super surprising on his phone, but we as the audience don't get to see it. I assume Walter may be guilty, or at least someone involved in Lottie's death at this point. Maybe he's like Cody's son, or he's related to Adam, or some kind of tie into some character that's been impacted by the Yellowjackets in the past. We then cut back to the core group at Melissa's house, where Van's coming back inside from getting stuff from the car. She sees that Ty's passed out, and Melissa's on the ground tied up still. It turns out Melissa closed the flue to her fireplace, so I'm assuming the fumes from that wound up knocking them all out. I'm not really sure how long Van was outside. Feels like a short enough time that maybe that shouldn't have happened, but either way. Van winds up taking the passed out Ty outside and giving her oxygen mask. We then get a weird alternate reality scene where good Ty and bad Ty are fighting for who's better for Van, until Ty eventually comes back to her senses, and it seems like good Ty may be represented here now. Van goes back in the house and gets Shauna outside too, but then grabs a knife and lets Melissa loose before pointing the knife at her. It then points out if she kills Melissa, maybe she can live and the wilderness will be happy and her cancer won't be a problem. Melissa winds up saying, "Okay, fine, I'll be your sacrifice," but Van can't do it. Then Melissa actually grabs the knife and winds up stabbing and killing Van. So pretty big death here. It seems like we lost one of our main Yellowjacket characters. We then see adult Van on this plane watching a screen of herself dead on the floor. And it seems like some kind of metaphor for her dying. It feels very similar to Lost, being on that plane. Then we have her younger self join her on the plane as well. And we have adult Van say, "I die, I'm dead." Ty and Shauna wind up coming into the house, and we see that Melissa's left. And then Ty absolutely loses it, seeing that Van's dead on the floor. Then cutting back to the two Vans on the plane, we have adult Van ask younger Van why was she sent in there if she was going to die. And then young Van responds with, "This is just how the story goes, and you actually saved the others." We ultimately end things off with the episode with adult Van saying, "If this isn't the ending, tell me what happens." And then young Van responds with, "Where would be the fun in that?" So things have gotten a little bit meta here as we fade to black with an alternate version of Glycerin playing. And I'm wondering here, is Van really dead, or is this some alternate realm that she's passed on to? Definitely a lot of questions needing answered as we close out this episode. So then jumping to the pros and cons, starting with the pros first. I much prefer Misty's character this episode and this season overall compared to the prior seasons. It seems like Shauna's replaced her as the crazy one amongst the group. Second pro for the episode, I'll say the Jeff and Callie scenes were lighthearted and fun as usual, even if they were less relevant to the overall plot. And then number 3, I'm at least intrigued with the Van after death storyline and how things develop from there. Then jumping over to some of the cons for the episode, the first one being I already talked about this, but Melissa having no gas in her car was awfully convenient as a plot device. Like, what was her plan regardless in the future? Was she not planning to ever drive again? And then number 2, I wasn't really a fan of the Hanna going nuts angle that we took here, even though I get she's a scientist and is really fascinated by these girls. Building off of that, it doesn't really feel like Joel McHale was really necessary for that role as Cody because he pretty much just killed off in a couple episodes. And then number 3 for the cons, it doesn't really feel like there's much interesting going on with the adult storyline other than trying to figure out what happened to Lottie. And with one episode left, we really need to close out a lot of these plot points, and I'm unsure if we're going to get a satisfactory conclusion, as opposed to it either being rushed or left open for the future. For an overall episode score here, I'm going to wind up saying neutral once again. We had some pretty good scenes here, but I don't really feel like this episode, or even really this season, has drawn me in necessarily in the way that season 1 did. But in fairness, we'll have to see how they wind up wrapping up the season in the next episode. But let me know what you thought. Were you a fan of this episode? What parts did you like or dislike? We've gone most of the season with me asking this question, but what do you think happened with Lottie? What do you think adult Misty saw on Walter's phone? Do you think he's guilty? Will Van stay dead, or will there be more to her story? Will we get more development between good Ty and evil Ty? Is teenage Misty now going to save them all? Will we finally uncover who Pit Girl is, or get more info on the Antler Queen? Or what are your thoughts with any other mysteries going on with the show? Sound off on all things Yellowjackets in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.